The night Luna Sophia overheard her husband planning to replace her. The entire world went silent. Not because she didn't expect betrayal, but because of how calmly Alpha Edward said it. She can't give me a proper heir. No anger. No hesitation. No guilt. Just a cold statement spoken by the most powerful alpha in Moonfang Kingdom, while firelight danced across crystal glasses and polished black oak. Outside the council chamber, Sophia stopped breathing. Snow drifted heavily through the castle corridors behind her. Wind howled against the ancient stone walls. Servants hurried past carrying silver trays and winter wine. Yet none of it sounded real anymore. Because inside that room the man she had loved for 7 years was discussing her replacement as if she were already gone. And the worst part? Nobody sounded shocked. She has always been loyal, one elder said carefully. Edward sighed. Loyalty is not enough. Sophia's fingers tightened around the edge of the wall beside her. Not enough. After 7 years beside him, that was all she had become. Not enough. Inside the chamber, someone shifted uncomfortably. Another elder lowered his voice. The pack respects Luna Sophia. They respect the title, Edward replied. Not the woman. A quiet laugh followed. Soft. Feminine. Sophia knew that laugh instantly. Victoria. Her cousin. Her closest friend. The woman who had slowly begun appearing beside Edward everywhere during the last few months. At council dinners. During hunting ceremonies. At winter festivals. Always smiling. Always graceful. Always standing just a little too close to her husband. Sophia had noticed. Of course she had noticed. Women always notice the exact moment another woman begins replacing them emotionally. The longer she listened, the colder her body became. We announced the transition during the blood moon ceremony, Edward continued. The pack will adjust quickly. Transition. Not divorce. Not betrayal. Transition. Like Sophia's existence could simply be rewritten with cleaner wording. Inside the chamber, glasses clinked softly. Someone asked about political alliances. Another mentioned future heirs. Future heirs. Sophia's hand moved instinctively toward her stomach. And suddenly, everything hurts. Because Edward didn't know. Nobody knew. 3 days earlier, the royal healer had placed trembling hands over Sophia's abdomen before whispering words Sophia thought would finally change her life forever. Twins. Not one heir. 2. Sophia remembered sitting there in stunned silence while tears filled her eyes. For one foolish moment, she had actually believed fate was finally rewarding her patience. She imagined Edward smiling for the first time in years. Imagined his walls breaking. Imagined him touching her stomach with wonder instead of distance. She imagined becoming enough. Now she understood how stupid hope could make a person. Inside the chamber, Victoria spoke again. Moonfang needs strength beside its alpha. Sophia closed her eyes. Because Victoria wasn't wrong. Strength was valuable in Moonfang. Coldness was respected. Mercy was seen as weakness. And Sophia had spent years loving a man who only admired power. The wind outside intensified violently. Snow hammered the castle windows harder now. Winter storms in Moonfang were dangerous. Entire patrols disappeared in them. Travelers froze beneath ice before sunrise. Even wolves avoided the northern wilderness once night fully fell. But somehow, standing outside that council chamber felt colder than the storm itself. Then Edward laughed quietly at something Victoria whispered. That sound destroyed her. Not because it was cruel. Because it was rare. Sophia couldn't remember the last time Edward laughed with her like that. For years she had chased tiny scraps of affection from him. A softer tone. A longer glance. A touch that lasted more than duty required. Every small kindness felt enormous because starvation makes people grateful for crumbs. And now, he was giving another woman everything Sophia had begged for silently. Tears burned her eyes. But she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not outside a room where people were deciding whether she still had value. Then one of the elders asked the question that finally shattered whatever remained inside her. And Luna Sophia? A pause followed. Edward answered without emotion. She will accept what's necessary for the pack. Sophia stared at the floor silently. Because he truly believed that. After years of enduring emotional neglect, quietly, after years of smiling through loneliness, after years of standing beside him, while he treated her heart like something inconvenient. Edward believed she would simply endure this too, like she always had. And maybe that was the cruelest part of all. He didn't think she would fight for him, because deep down, he knew she loved him enough not to. Sophia inhaled shakily. Then slowly, something inside her changed. Not rage. Not revenge. Something colder. Acceptance. The kind that arrives after loving someone for too long without being loved back. Inside the chamber, plans continued. Ceremonies. Announcements. Political reactions. Nobody noticed Luna standing alone outside the door, while her entire future collapsed quietly around her. And Sophia suddenly realized something terrifying. If she disappeared tonight, how long would it take Edward to notice? Hours? Days? Would he search for her immediately? Or would Victoria simply take her seat beside him before sunrise? The thought hollowed her chest completely. A servant passed nearby carrying candles. The warm glow briefly illuminated Sophia's face. Pale skin, shaking lips, eyes filled with heartbreak she no longer had strength to hide. Yet even then, she looked strangely calm, because some pain is so deep it silences emotion entirely. Inside the chamber, chairs scraped softly against the floor. The meeting was ending. Sophia stepped backward into the shadows before anyone opened the doors. She could already imagine what would happen next. Victoria would walk beside Edward through the corridor. Their shoulders might brush accidentally. The servants would pretend not to notice. Rumors would spread through the castle before midnight. And Sophia would once again return to her chambers alone. No warmth, no affection. No husband was waiting for her. Just silence. The same silence she had lived with for years. Only tonight, that silence finally answered her. He was never going to love her. Not after loyalty. Not after sacrifice. Not after 7 years. Not even after children. Especially not after children. Because if Edward truly wanted heirs, he would have looked at the woman carrying them with more care. Sophia swallowed painfully. Then she turned away from the council chamber. Away from the warmth. Away from the voices. Away from the man she had spent years destroying herself for. Snow struck her face the moment she stepped outside the castle gates. The storm had become vicious now. White wind swallowed the mountain paths. Torches flickered violently against darkness. The frozen wilderness stretched endlessly beyond the cliffs of Moonfang Kingdom, like a grave waiting patiently beneath ice. Sophia walked into it anyway. One step, then another. The snow soaked through her shoes almost immediately. Her cloak whipped violently behind her. Still, she kept walking, because for the first time in years, she wasn't chasing Edward anymore. Behind her, the castle lights glowed faintly through the storm. Beautiful, cold, untouchable, just like the alpha inside it. Sophia stopped briefly at the edge of the mountain trail and looked back one final time. 7 years. 7 years loving a man who never chose her willingly. 7 years mistaking endurance for devotion. 7 years convincing herself that if she stayed soft enough, patient enough, understanding enough, eventually he would love her back. But love should not feel like surviving winter every single day. A tear finally slid down her face. Then another. The wind carried them away instantly. Sophia placed both hands protectively over her stomach. Tiny heartbeats. Tiny lives. Completely innocent. They will never grow up begging for love, she whispered shakily. And somewhere deep inside the storm, a decision was made. Not inside the castle council chamber. Not by Alpha Edward. By the woman he had already discarded. Because while Moonfang prepared to crown a new Luna, the old one was disappearing into the frozen wilderness carrying the future heirs of the kingdom. And by the time Alpha Edward discovered the truth, Sophia would already be gone. Morning arrived quietly over Moonfang Kingdom. But inside the Alpha Castle, something had changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. No shattered glass. No screaming arguments. No public confrontation. Just silence. The dangerous kind. The kind people rarely notice until it's already too late. Sophia still appeared at breakfast exactly on time. Still wore the silver Luna crest over her dark winter dress. still carried herself with the calm grace expected from the alpha's wife. To anyone watching from a distance, nothing seemed unusual. And perhaps that was the most devastating part of all. Because women like Sophia learned long ago how to suffer beautifully. The dining hall glowed with warm candlelight despite the storm outside. Servants moved carefully between long black tables. Snow pressed heavily against towering windows overlooking the frozen cliffs beyond Moonfang. At the center of the room sat Alpha Edward. Cold, controlled, unreadable. Documents rested beside his untouched coffee, while several warriors briefed him about northern border activity. Sophia approached silently and poured tea into his cup. Her hands didn't shake. That alone should have warned him something was wrong. For years, Sophia had moved around Edward carefully, always attentive to his moods, always searching his face for approval, always hoping for affection that rarely came. But this morning, she didn't look at him at all. And somehow, that unsettled him immediately. "You're quiet today," Edward muttered without lifting his eyes from the documents. Sophia placed the teapot down carefully. "Am I?" Edward finally looked up then. Just briefly, but long enough to notice something unfamiliar in her expression. Absence. Not anger. Not sadness. Worse, distance. For reasons he couldn't explain, irritation flickered through him instantly. Normally, Sophia smiled softly at breakfast. Normally, she asked whether he slept well. Normally, she remained close enough for him to feel her presence even in silence. Today, she felt far away despite standing beside him. Edward stared at her another moment, then returned to his paperwork. That was how their marriage survived. Short conversations, cold silences, distance disguised as duty. Around them, the room continued moving normally. Warriors discussed patrol routes. Servants refreshed candles. Snowstorms hammered the castle walls harder with every passing minute. Then the massive dining hall doors opened. Victoria entered wearing pale silver fur trimmed with white fox wool. Beautiful, elegant, perfectly composed. The kind of woman noble families admired instantly. Several heads turned toward her automatically. Victoria smiled warmly as she approached Edward's table. "Sophia," she said gently, "you missed dinner last night." Sophia finally looked directly at her. And for one brief moment, Victoria's smile weakened slightly, because something about Sophia felt different today. "I wasn't feeling well," Sophia answered calmly. No apology. No nervous explanation. No effort to make Victoria comfortable. That tiny change altered the atmosphere instantly. Victoria noticed it. Edward noticed it too, though neither understood why it suddenly mattered. For months, Victoria had slowly woven herself into spaces that once belonged entirely to Sophia. Standing beside Edward during ceremonies, managing banquet preparations, assisting during council events. Small things, subtle things, the kind that appear harmless until one day the original person realizes they've been quietly replaced piece by piece. Sophia had noticed every single moment. She remembered the first time Victoria adjusted Edward's collar during a feast. The first time Edward asked Victoria's opinion during council discussions instead of hers. The first time servants mistakenly assumed Victoria would stand beside the alpha during formal ceremonies. Each incident felt small alone. Together, they slowly erased her. Edward suddenly rose from his chair. "We leave for the northern border inspection in an hour." Victoria immediately stood as well. "I already prepared your winter cloak." Sophia's chest tightened so sharply she nearly reacted. Because that used to be her responsibility. Not assigned. Not required. Just something she always did because she loved him. Edward didn't notice. He simply continued reading military reports while Victoria remained beside him naturally, as if she already belonged there. And somehow, that hurt more than the conversation Sophia overheard the night before. Because betrayal wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it happened slowly, quietly, until one day you realized someone else had taken your place while you were still standing there. Outside the castle windows, the storm worsened. Moonfang winters were feared across every northern territory. Entire caravans disappeared beneath avalanches. Wolves froze mid-transformation during blizzards. Children were warned never to wander near the Frostfang Mountains after sunset. Nature here did not forgive weakness. And yet, Sophia no longer feared the wilderness nearly as much as she feared staying. Later that afternoon, she moved carefully through the lower corridors beneath the eastern tower. Most nobles avoided this section of the castle. Too cold, too quiet, too close to the healer chambers where illness and death lingered constantly. Old Martha looked up immediately when Sophia entered. The elderly healer's expression softened with concern. "You should be resting." Sophia closed the wooden door behind her quietly. "I needed to see you." Martha's eyes dropped instinctively toward Sophia's stomach. The old woman still remembered Sophia's tears 3 nights earlier when she learned about the twins. Not tears of sadness, relief, hope, the kind that now felt tragic to remember. "You should tell the Alpha," Martha whispered carefully. Sophia smiled faintly, a broken kind of smile. "He already chose another Luna." Silence filled the room instantly. Even the fire seemed quieter afterward. Martha stared at her in disbelief. "No." Sophia nodded once. The healer slowly sank into her chair. For a long moment neither woman spoke. Outside, wind screamed through the castle towers like something alive. Then Martha grabbed Sophia's hand tightly. "You cannot travel north while pregnant." Sophia looked toward the frost-covered window. "I'm not staying here." "Sophia." "He's replacing me." Her voice cracked finally. Just once. But it carried years of buried pain inside it. Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Edward doesn't know about the babies." "He doesn't deserve to." The words shocked even Sophia slightly. Because despite everything, part of her still loved him. That was the cruel thing about loving someone emotionally unavailable. You continue protecting them long after they stop protecting you. Martha lowered her voice urgently. "The wilderness will kill you." Sophia's expression hardened slowly. "No," she whispered. "The castle will." The healer fell silent. Because deep down, she understood exactly what Sophia meant. Emotional starvation could destroy people just as thoroughly as winter. Sophia moved toward the table and carefully unfolded an old northern map. Frostfang territory stretched across the upper mountains beyond Moonfang borders. Dangerous land. Isolated land. A place where even royal patrols disappeared sometimes. Her fingers traced one of the old trading routes through the snow-covered forests. "If I leave before the blood moon ceremony," she murmured quietly, "most people will assume I'm visiting the eastern villages." Martha looked horrified. "You've already planned this." Sophia didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was, she started planning the moment she heard Edward laugh with Victoria. That sound had ended something inside her permanently. Not her love. Worse, her hope. And once hope dies, people become capable of leaving places they once begged to stay in. Another violent gust slammed against the healer chamber windows. The candles flickered hard enough to nearly go out. Sophia looked toward the storm silently. Beyond those mountains waited freezing rivers, collapsed hunting trails, wild wolves, death. But somewhere inside that brutal wilderness, there was also freedom. No pretending, no humiliation, no watching another woman slowly take her place beside the man she loved. Just survival. For herself. For her unborn children. For the tiny lives growing inside her that still had no idea how fragile their mother's heart had become. Then suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed somewhere beyond the corridor outside. Sophia froze instantly. Martha looked toward the door nervously. The footsteps stopped. A shadow passed beneath the crack under the wooden entrance. Large. Male. Motionless. Sophia's pulse quickened. Because almost nobody visited the healer chambers during storms. And for one terrifying second, she wondered if Edward somehow already knew everything. 3 days later, Moonfang Castle no longer felt like a home. It felt like a place waiting for an announcement. The servants sensed it first. Servants always did. They noticed which woman the Alpha looked at during meetings, which name appeared more often in conversation. His footsteps echoed beside him through the halls after midnight. And lately, Victoria's footsteps were everywhere. Whispers followed Sophia through the corridors now. Not loud enough to confront, just quiet enough to wound. She stood beside him during council again. "I heard the blood moon ceremony will change everything. Do you think the Alpha already told Luna Sophia?" The moment Sophia entered a room, Conversations stopped. Eyes lowered. People suddenly became very interested in polishing silver trays or arranging flowers. Pity filled the castle like smoke. And pity was far more humiliating than cruelty. Because cruelty at least treated you like someone worth attacking. Pity meant everyone already believed you had lost. Sophia endured it silently. That frightened people more than tears would have. She still attended formal meetings beside Edward. Still wore the Moonfang Luna crest across her chest. Still carried herself with impossible dignity, while another woman slowly occupied spaces that once belonged entirely to her. But if anyone looked closely, they would have noticed the change. Sophia no longer reached for Edward instinctively. No longer watched his face while he spoke. No longer adjusted his gloves before patrol meetings. The small acts of love had vanished quietly. And strangely, Alpha Edward noticed every missing detail without understanding why their absence bothered him. That was the dangerous thing about emotional neglect. People rarely value devotion while it exists. Only once it disappears. The winter hunt banquet arrived beneath heavy snowfall. One of Munfang's oldest traditions. A celebration held after the final hunt before the deep winter season locked the mountains in ice. The grand hall transformed completely for the occasion. Massive chandeliers glowed overhead like captured fire. Silver goblets lined endless banquet tables. Musicians played near the western balcony while nobles and warriors filled the castle with laughter loud enough to drown the storm outside. Every powerful family in Moonfang attended. Every important eye watched the alpha table carefully. And tonight, Victoria sat beside Edward openly. Not hidden. Not subtle. Openly. She wore dark crimson silk with silver embroidery across her sleeves. Her hand rested near Edward's arm while she leaned toward him during conversations. Comfortable. Familiar. Like she was already rehearsing for the role of Luna. Around the hall people noticed. Of course they noticed. Several elders exchanged uneasy glances. Some warriors looked away entirely. Nobody spoke against it. Because nobody challenged Alpha Edward publicly. Not even when his wife still sat under the same roof. Then the main doors opened. And the entire hall went silent. Sophia entered alone. Deep blue velvet wrapped around her figure like midnight against snow. Her dark hair fell softly over one shoulder. No excessive jewels. No glittering crown. Nothing dramatic. Yet somehow, she looked more beautiful than anyone in the room. Not because of appearance. Because something inside her had changed. For years, Sophia carried the invisible exhaustion of loving someone who withheld affection. People could sense it even when they didn't understand it. The constant anxiety, the quiet sadness, the desperate hope hidden behind every smile. But tonight, that desperation was gone. And without it, she looked untouchable. Even the musicians faltered briefly. At the alpha table, Edward looked up automatically. Then I froze. Something strange hit him instantly. Not admiration. Not a simple attraction. Recognition. As if he were seeing his own wife clearly for the first time in years. The entire room disappeared for a moment. There was only Sophia standing beneath golden candlelight, while snow swirled beyond the towering windows behind her. And suddenly, Edward couldn't remember the last time he had truly looked at her. Victoria noticed his expression immediately. Her smile tightened almost invisibly. Then, deliberately, she reached upward and adjusted Edward's collar gently. An intimate gesture. Small enough to appear harmless. Personal enough to humiliate Sophia publicly. The room went still. Everyone understood what Victoria was doing. Claiming territory. Not with words. With familiarity. And now every eye turned towards Sophia waiting for the inevitable reaction. Would she cry? Would she flee the banquet? Would she finally confront them publicly? The tension inside the hall became unbearable. Even the servants stopped moving. Because moments like these decided reputations in Moonfang. A Luna who lost control became weak. A Luna who begged became forgettable. Sophia looked at Victoria for one long silent moment. Then at Edward. And Edward felt something uneasy twist inside his chest. Because Sophia's face revealed absolutely nothing. No jealousy. No heartbreak. Nothing. That frightened him unexpectedly. Then, without a single word, Sophia walked past them. The entire hall followed her movements silently. One step. Then another. Blue velvet trailing behind her across polished black floors. Until she stopped beside Beta Lucas. Lucas looked genuinely stunned when Sophia sat beside him, because she had never chosen another seat before. Not once in 7 years. "You've never sat here before," Lucas said carefully. Sophia picked up a wine glass calmly. "Maybe I wanted different company tonight." Several nearby nobles nearly choked on their drinks. Across the hall, Edward went completely still. Something primal moved violently beneath his skin. Possessive. Sharp. Ugly. He watched Lucas lean closer while speaking quietly to Sophia. I watched Sophia smile faintly at something he said. Smile. At another man. Edward's fingers tightened around his goblet slowly. The music suddenly sounded distant. Muted. Meaningless. He couldn't hear the conversations around him anymore. Couldn't focus on the feast. Couldn't stop staring. Because Sophia looked happy. Not perfectly happy. Not healed. But lighter. And somehow that unsettled him more than if she had screamed at him publicly. Victoria leaned closer. "She's trying to provoke you." Edward didn't answer. Because deep down, he wasn't sure Sophia cared enough to provoke him anymore. That realization disturbed him deeply. Across the banquet hall, Lucas studied Sophia carefully. Unlike most men in Moonfang, Beta Lucas was observant enough to notice quiet suffering. He had watched Sophia slowly disappear emotionally over the years. Watched her smile through loneliness while Edward buried himself in duty and politics. And tonight, he noticed something else. Sophia looked like a woman saying goodbye internally. Not dramatic. Not impulsive. Resolved. That frightened him. "You all right?" Lucas asked quietly. Sophia took another sip of wine before answering. "Do I look unwell?" Lucas hesitated. "No," he admitted honestly. "You look like someone who made a decision." Sophia's eyes flickered slightly. Then she smiled again. But this time, the sadness behind it nearly broke him. At the alpha table, Edward stood abruptly. The movement startled nearby warriors. Victoria looked up immediately. "Edward." But Edward was no longer listening. Because across the room, Lucas had just leaned down toward Sophia closely enough to whisper something near her ear. And Sophia laughed softly. A real laugh. Quiet. Warm. Natural. Edward's chest tightened violently. His wolf stirred beneath his skin instantly. Not anger. Something far more dangerous. Fear. Not losing power. Not a scandal. Fear of another man becoming important to her. The realization hit so suddenly it almost made him nauseous. For years, Sophia had orbited around him completely. Patient. Loyal. Always waiting. Edward never considered what might happen if she stopped. But tonight, watching her smile at another man beneath golden candlelight, while winter storms battered the castle walls outside, Alpha Edward experienced something unfamiliar for the first time in years. Jealousy. Raw. Violent. And impossible to ignore. Then suddenly, Sophia pressed a hand lightly against her stomach beneath the table. A tiny movement. Barely noticeable. But Lucas saw it instantly. His expression sharpened. "You're pale." Sophia quickly lowered her hand. "I'm fine." But across the hall, Edward had seen it too. And something about that tiny gesture made unease crawl slowly through his chest. Because for one brief second, Sophia looked afraid. Restless. Possessive. The reaction shocked him. Because wolves only reacted this way over one thing. Mate. The word surfaced so suddenly it nearly made him stop breathing. Mate. Edward went completely still. No. That was impossible. Sophia couldn't be his true mate. She was. Why had their relationship always felt distant? Why had he never experienced the overwhelming pull other wolves described? Why had their marriage felt more like responsibility than destiny? Across the dance floor, Sophia laughed softly at something Lucas whispered. Edward's jaw tightened. Because regardless of logic, his wolf hated seeing her touched by another man. Hated the sight of Lucas's hand resting against Sophia's waist. Hated the softness in her expression. Hated the growing possibility that another man might succeed where Edward had failed completely. Victoria noticed the change in him immediately. "You're bleeding," she whispered. Edward looked down absently at the blood dripping across his palm. He hadn't even felt the glass break. That unsettled him further, because losing control came dangerously close to shifting. And Alpha Edward never lost control publicly. Never. Yet tonight, every instinct inside him felt unstable. The music continued softly beneath the chandeliers. Snow hammered the castle windows harder. And somewhere deep beneath Edward's confusion, a terrible realization slowly began forming. He didn't want Sophia looking at another man that way. The thought should have been simple jealousy. Instead, it felt deeper, older, like panic. On the dance floor, Sophia suddenly stiffened. A sharp pain crossed her face so quickly most people missed it. But Lucas noticed instantly. His grip on her tightened protectively. Sophia. She pressed a hand subtly against her stomach. Just for a second. Then I tried to recover. I'm all right. But she wasn't. The twins had made her weaker during the last few days. The stress. The sleepless nights. The cold. Her body was beginning to struggle. Lucas frowned immediately. You're pale. Before Sophia could answer, Edward was already moving toward them. The speed surprised even him. One moment he stood beside the alpha table. The next, he was crossing the dance floor with blood still dripping from his hand. The hall fell quiet again. Victoria followed several steps behind him. Edward stopped directly in front of Sophia. What happened? His voice sounded sharper than intended. Protective. Demanding. Sophia stepped backward automatically. The movement hit him harder than expected. Because for years, Sophia instinctively moved closer whenever he approached. Tonight, she retreated. I'm fine, she answered quietly. Edward frowned. No, you're not. For one strange moment, genuine concern slipped through his usual cold composure. And Sophia noticed it immediately. That almost made everything worse. Because after years of emotional neglect, the sudden concern felt cruel. Victoria appeared beside Edward quickly. She's probably overwhelmed, she said lightly. Sophia looked toward her cousin slowly, then back at Edward. And finally, their eyes met properly. For the first time in years, Edward saw no love left in Sophia's expression. No quiet devotion. No hope. No longing. Only exhaustion. Deep, emotional exhaustion. The kind people carry when they've spent too long loving someone who never loved them back correctly. And suddenly, Alpha Edward felt something cold crawl down his spine. Because hatred would have been easier. Hatred meant emotion still existed. But this looked like someone emotionally letting go. His wolf reacted violently to that realization. Danger. Loss. Find her. Keep her close. The instincts crashed through him so strongly he nearly staggered. Sophia noticed the flicker of panic in his eyes. For a brief second, something painful crossed her face too. Because once upon a time, this was all she wanted. For Edward to notice her. To care. To look at her like losing her would destroy him. But now it was happening too late. Sophia lowered her gaze calmly, then stepped away from him. Away from Lucas. Away from the center of the dance floor. The musicians hesitated uncertainly before continuing the song. But the atmosphere inside the banquet hall had changed permanently. Because everyone watching had seen it. The alpha's reaction. The possessiveness. The panic. The way Edward looked at Sophia when another man touched her. And whispers were already beginning again across Moonfang Castle. Quiet. Dangerous. Because for the first time, people were starting to wonder whether Alpha Edward had made a catastrophic mistake. And somewhere high above the grand hall, beyond the candlelight and music and noble gossip, the winter storm surrounding Moonfang Kingdom grew even worse. As if the mountains themselves sensed something was coming. The next morning, Moonfang Castle woke to silence. Not peaceful silence. The wrong kind. The kind that arrives just before disaster reveals itself. Snow continued falling heavily across the mountain cliffs surrounding the kingdom. The storm from the previous night had not weakened. If anything, it had grown worse. Wind screamed through the northern towers hard enough to rattle ancient windows. Servants moved quickly through corridors carrying firewood and lanterns. Warriors prepared for delayed patrol routes due to dangerous visibility conditions. Everything appeared normal, Until Alpha Edward entered his study. First, he didn't notice the parchment lying across his desk. His attention remained fixed on border reports and unfinished council notes from the banquet. But then he saw the Moonfang Luna seal pressed into black wax. And something inside him tightened immediately. Edward stepped closer slowly. The parchment trembled slightly in the cold air leaking through the stone walls. Then he saw the signature at the bottom. Sophia Evernight. Elegant. Precise. Final. For one long second, his mind refused to understand what he was looking at. Divorce papers. Official separation documents recognized under Northern Alpha law. The room suddenly felt too quiet. Edward stared at the signature again, as if looking longer would somehow change it. But Sophia's handwriting remained the same. Calm. Controlled. No emotional outburst. No desperate plea. No accusation written across the page. That disturbed him more than anger would have. Because rage meant attachment. This felt like surrender. No. The word left him quietly. Almost unconsciously. Edward grabbed the papers harder. His pulse began rising dangerously. Last night replayed violently in his mind. Sophia dancing with Lucas. Sophia pulled away when Edward approached. The emptiness in her eyes. Then something colder hit him. The balcony. Her hand against her stomach. The way she looked exhausted instead of angry. A terrible feeling crawled slowly through his chest. Edward turned instantly and stormed out of the study. Sophia. His voice echoed through the castle corridors hard enough to silence nearby servants immediately. Several maids jumped in fear. Guards straightened instantly as Edward moved through the halls faster than anyone had seen in years. Sophia. No answer. The castle suddenly felt enormous. Too enormous. Edward reached the eastern wing and shoved open the doors to Sophia's chambers hard enough that one slammed violently against the wall. Then he stopped. The room was empty. Not temporarily empty. Gone. Cold air swept violently through open balcony doors while snow scattered across dark marble floors. Closets stood open. Bare. Jewelry cases emptied. Bookshelves cleared. Personal belongings missing. The room looked stripped of life. Like someone had carefully erased themselves piece by piece during the night. Edward walked farther inside slowly. Every detail struck harder than it should have. Her favorite winter cloak was missing. The silver hairpin he once gifted her was gone. Even the flowers near the fireplace had been removed. Sophia hadn't left impulsively. She planned this. The realization hit him like ice water. Edward moved toward the balcony immediately. Outside, the storm raged mercilessly across Moonfang's cliffs. Snow erased footprints within minutes. Mountain paths vanished beneath thick ice. The frozen wilderness beyond the kingdom stretched endlessly into white darkness. And somewhere inside that storm, Sophia was alone. For the first time in years, true panic hit him. Not irritation. Not jealousy. Panic. Raw and immediate. Find her. The roar echoed through the castle hard enough to freeze everyone nearby. Guards rushed toward the eastern wing instantly. Servants scattered. Council members emerged from nearby chambers in confusion. Edward turned toward the nearest warriors with eyes already glowing gold beneath the surface. Search every road leaving Moonfang territory. His voice shook dangerously now. Every village. Every trading route. Every mountain passes. Nobody moved slowly after that. Because Alpha Edward looked close to losing control completely. Beta Lucas arrived moments later, still fastening his winter coat. One glance inside Sophia's empty chambers told him enough. The open balcony. The missing belongings. The storm. Then he saw the divorce documents crushed inside Edward's hand. Lucas went still. She left willingly? Edward held up the papers silently. Shock spread across the room immediately. Several servants exchanged horrified looks. Because Luna Sophia leaving the Alpha Palace willingly was unthinkable. Moonfang wives endured. They stayed. They adapted. They suffered quietly. They did not disappear into winter storms alone. Lucas took the documents slowly. His eyes scanned Sophia's signature. Then his jaw tightened. Because suddenly, the sadness in Sophia's eyes at the banquet made terrifying sense. She planned this before last night, Lucas muttered quietly. Edward looked at him sharply. What? Lucas hesitated, then remembered Sophia's expression during the dance. Resolved. Not emotional. Resolved. Like someone who already said goodbye internally. Before he could answer, another voice spoke from the doorway. There's something you should know, Alpha. Old Martha stood there trembling. Her face looked pale beneath the candlelight. And immediately, something inside Edward went cold again. Because healers only looked like that when death followed. Edward turned slowly toward her. Martha's hands shook visibly. For a moment she looked unable to speak at all. Then finally, she was pregnant. Silence. Absolute silence. Even the storm outside seemed distant suddenly. Edward stared at her blankly. What? The word barely came out. Martha's eyes filled with tears immediately. With twins. The world stopped. Edward physically staggered backward. Lucas caught the edge of the table beside him instinctively. Several servants gasped softly in horror. Twins. Sophia had been carrying heirs. His heirs. And nobody knew. No, not nobody. Sophia knew. Alone. While listening to him discuss replacing her, Edward's breathing became uneven instantly. No. The word sounded broken now. Not angry. Broken. Images crashed violently through his mind. Sophia touching her stomach during the banquet. Her sudden exhaustion. The fear in her eyes. The distance. Then the memory of the council chamber conversation returned fully. She can't give me a proper heir. Edward felt physically sick. Martha wiped tears from her face shakily. She wanted to tell you, the healer whispered. She thought the babies would finally make you happy. Every word landed like a blade. Edward grabbed the table hard enough that would splintered beneath his claws. She heard us, he realized suddenly. Martha lowered her eyes silently. That answer was enough. Everything inside him detonated. His wolf erupted beneath his skin violently. Rage. Terror. Instinct. Mate. Mine. Protect them. Find her. Edward's eyes flashed pure gold now. The room temperature seemed to drop instantly beneath the force of his aura. Several servants stepped backward in fear. Because Alpha Edward looked dangerous in a way few people had ever witnessed. Not cruel. Desperate. She thought you wanted another Luna, Martha whispered through tears. She believed the babies wouldn't matter to you. That sentence destroyed him completely. Because deep down, Edward knew she had every reason to believe it. He remembered every ignored conversation, every cold response, every moment Sophia stood beside him hoping for affection, while he buried himself in duty and politics. And now she is gone. Pregnant. Alone. Traveling through one of the deadliest winters Moonfang had seen in decades. A horrifying thought struck him suddenly. The wilderness. Sophia had no real survival training beyond palace routes. No winter escort. No protection. If she crossed northern territory alone, the mountains would kill her. Edward moved instantly. Prepare the trackers. Lucas grabbed his arm sharply. Edward, wait. The storm is getting worse. I don't care. You won't survive blind searching in Frostfang conditions. Edward's expression darkened violently. She's carrying my children. Lucas froze. Because that was the first time Edward sounded emotional about Sophia. Not politically concerned. Not responsible. Terrified. And somehow, that frightened Lucas too. Outside the palace walls, snow continued swallowing the mountain roads deeper beneath ice. Far beyond Moonfang territory, the frozen wilderness stretched endlessly under dark skies. And somewhere inside that white nightmare, Luna Sophia was disappearing farther away with every passing hour. Unaware that the man who failed to love her properly had finally realized he might lose her forever. Alpha Adrian, the exiled ruler of Frostfang, one of the most feared wolves in the north, and a man Moonfang legends still spoke about carefully. Years earlier, Adrian nearly destroyed Edward's forces during the border wars. Entire battalions disappeared in Frostfang territory under his command. Even now, older warriors lowered their voices whenever speaking his name. Not because Adrian was cruel, because he was dangerous in ways most alphas weren't. Cold when necessary, patient when hunting enemies, absolutely merciless toward betrayal. And tonight, he was staring down at an unconscious woman half buried beneath snow. Sophia looked close to death. Frost-covered strands of her dark hair. Her lips had turned pale from exposure. One trembling hand still rested protectively against her stomach even while unconscious. Adrian frowned immediately. What was a noblewoman doing this deep inside Frostfang territory during a winter storm? He crouched beside her carefully. Then his expression changed. Because beneath the scent of blood and snow, he smelled moonfang. Not faintly. Strongly. Royal blood. Adrian went completely still. Interesting. Very interesting. Moments later, he lifted Sophia into his arms and carried her toward the isolated cabin overlooking the frozen valley below. The storm erased their tracks almost instantly, as if the mountains themselves intended to hide her. When Sophia finally opened her eyes again, a firelight flickered softly across wooden walls. Warmth. Real warmth. For one confused moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then she saw the stranger standing near the fireplace. Tall. Still. Watching her carefully. His silver eyes reflected the firelight strangely. Dangerous eyes. The kind predators carried before deciding whether something was a threat. Sophia instinctively tried to sit up too quickly. Pain shot through her body immediately. You nearly died. His voice was calm. Deep. Controlled. Sophia forced herself upright weakly despite the pain. Who are you? The man studied her for several seconds before answering. Alpha Adrian. Everything inside Sophia froze. Not from the cold. Recognition. Every northern kingdom knew that name. The exiled Alpha of Frostfang. Edward's oldest enemy. The wolf who vanished after the border wars and built power quietly beyond the mountains. Sophia instinctively tried standing. If Adrian recognized her, pain ripped violently through her stomach. She nearly collapsed instantly. But Adrian moved faster. He caught her before she hit the floor. Strong hands steadied her carefully. And immediately, his expression darkened. You're pregnant. Sophia went completely still. Her pulse spiked violently. No. No. Adrian's eyes narrowed slowly. Then he inhaled once. A wolf's instinct. And realization struck him instantly afterward. Moonfang. Alpha blood. Twins. Edward's heirs. The atmosphere inside the cabin changed immediately. Adrian looked at Sophia differently after that. Not with desire. Not even curiosity. Recognition. Understanding. Because now he understood exactly why a pregnant Luna would risk death crossing Frostfang territory alone in winter. What did Edward do to you? The question was quiet. But it is dangerous. Sophia looked away immediately. And somehow, that silence answered more than words could have. Adrian watched her carefully. The bruised exhaustion beneath her eyes. The emotional collapse hidden beneath controlled breathing. The way she instinctively protected her stomach even now. Then suddenly, he looked furious. Not loud fury. Worse. The controlled kind. The kind powerful men carried when deciding whether someone deserved mercy. Outside the cabin, snow slammed violently against the walls. Inside, fire crackled softly between them while shadows moved across old wooden beams overhead. Sophia realized something terrifying then. She had escaped one dangerous alpha, only to collapse directly into the territory of another. And somewhere far behind her beyond the storm, Alpha Edward was still searching. 9 days after Sophia disappeared, Moonfang Castle no longer resembled a royal palace. It looked haunted. The storm outside had finally weakened. But inside the Alpha residence, something far more dangerous was unraveling. Broken furniture littered the eastern halls. Deep claw marks scarred stone walls near the throne chamber. Several windows remained shattered from violent shifts during the night. Servants moved silently now. Carefully. Because nobody knew what might trigger Alpha Edward anymore. The entire palace had begun living around his instability. Meals left untouched outside his office. Meetings cancelled without explanation. Patrol commanders speaking in whispers outside closed doors. Even the wolves inside Moonfang territory had become restless. Because their alpha was losing control. And wolves always sensed when their leader was breaking internally. Edward hadn't slept properly in 9 days. Not truly. Every time exhaustion finally dragged him unconscious, he dreamed of Sophia disappearing deeper into snow while he failed to reach her. Sometimes she was crying. Sometimes she was silent. Sometimes she turned toward another man instead of him. Those dreams always ended the same way. Blood in the snow. Then Edward woke violently before dawn with his wolf trying to tear free beneath his skin. Trackers continued returning empty-handed. No confirmed sightings. No surviving footprints. No abandoned camps. The wilderness had swallowed her completely. And every hour without answers made Edward worse. The terrifying part? He finally understood why. It wasn't only guilt. It was the bond. The mate bond he spent years ignoring. Now that Sophia was gone, his wolf reacted like something had been ripped out of him physically. Aggression increased. Control weakened. Instincts sharpened into obsession. Find her. Protect her. Bring her home. The commands repeated constantly beneath his skin until he could barely think clearly anymore. Late one evening, Edward stood alone inside the ruined council chamber staring out toward the frozen cliffs beyond Moonfang. Snow still covered the kingdom heavily. Beautiful from a distance. Deadly up close. Somewhere beyond those mountains, Sophia was surviving without him. Or maybe, not surviving at all. The thought nearly destroyed him every time it surfaced. Behind him, careful footsteps approached. Victoria. She paused near the doorway first, as if sensing the danger in the room immediately. "You're frightening the pack," she said quietly. Edward didn't answer at first. For several long seconds, he simply continued staring into the storm outside. Then slowly, he turned toward her. And for the first time, he truly saw her clearly. Not the polished noblewoman who flattered council members. Not the elegant woman who always stood beside him perfectly during ceremonies. Something else. Ambition. Calculation. A woman who noticed emotional distance inside a marriage and stepped into it willingly. Not Sophia. Never Sophia. Because Sophia had loved gently. Victoria loved strategically. The realization sickened him. "You knew," Edward said quietly. Victoria stiffened immediately. Knew what? His eyes locked onto hers. "You knew she was hurting." Silence. Victoria crossed her arms slowly. Defensive. She was weak. The moment the words left her mouth, the temperature inside the chamber seemed to drop. Edward's eyes flashed gold instantly. Not human anymore. Wolf. Dangerous wolf. Victoria took an unconscious step backward. Because suddenly, she realized something terrifying. Edward wasn't grieving politically. He was grieving personally. "She was carrying my children." Victoria went pale. Absolute silence swallowed the room. Even the fire beside the council table seemed quieter afterward. For one brief moment, Victoria looked genuinely shocked. Because she hadn't known. And now, everything she carefully built over the last year collapsed instantly. Edward saw it happen in her eyes. The calculations. The panic. The realization that Sophia had left carrying the future heirs of Moonfang. "You lied to me," Victoria whispered weakly. Edward laughed once. Cold. Disgusted. "No," he said quietly. "You lied to yourself." Victoria's face crumbled slowly. Because deep down, she finally understood the truth. Edward never loved her either. She was simply convenient while he emotionally neglected the woman who actually mattered. And now that woman is gone. Possibly dying somewhere in the wilderness. "You will never stand beside me again." The sentence landed like an execution. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. For months she imagined this moment differently. Sophia removed quietly. The pack eventually accepted change. Edward slowly chooses her fully. Instead, she was watching the alpha unravel over another woman entirely. But Edward was already walking away. Because suddenly, none of it mattered anymore. Not politics. Not alliances. Not appearances. Only Sophia. Only finding her before winter buried her beneath ice forever. That night, Moonfang Castle fell silent unusually early. Snow drifted softly beyond darkened towers while servants avoided the eastern wing completely. Because Alpha Edward had locked himself inside Sophia's abandoned chambers. Alone. The room still carried traces of her. Lavender oil near the vanity. Books stacked beside the fireplace. One silver earring forgotten beneath the bed. Small things. Painful things. Edward moved through the room slowly. Almost carefully. as if touching anything too quickly might erase the last remaining evidence that Sophia had truly lived there. Then he found the scarf. Dark blue wool folded near the balcony chair. Sophia must have forgotten it while packing. Edward picked it up slowly, and the moment he did, memories attacked him without mercy. Sophia waited near the castle entrance during storms because she worried about his patrol routes. Sophia quietly reheated meals after he ignored dinner again. Sophia smiled hopefully whenever he showed even the smallest amount of affection. God. The gifts. Edward closed his eyes painfully. She used to leave gifts in his office. Tiny things. Books she thought he'd enjoy. Warm gloves during winter patrols. Tea imported from southern territories because he once mentioned liking it casually. Edward barely acknowledged any of them. At the time, he convinced himself emotional distance was necessary. That affection weakened leaders. That love distracted alphas from duty. But standing alone inside her empty room now, he finally understood the truth. Sophia had spent 7 years loving him completely, and he responded by starving her emotionally until she disappeared. The realization destroyed something inside him. A broken sound escaped his throat unexpectedly. Edward sank slowly onto the floor beside the bed, still clutching the scarf. And for the first time since childhood, Alpha Edward cried. Not gracefully, not quietly. The kind of grief that tears through someone after they realize too late what they destroyed with their own hands. Outside the balcony, snow continued falling softly across Moonfang Kingdom. Beautiful. Silent. Merciless. Hours passed before Edward finally moved again. His eyes looked hollow now. Destroyed. Then suddenly, his wolf reacted violently. Edward froze instantly. A feeling. Faint. Distant. But there. Sophia. Alive. The bond pulsed weakly somewhere far north beyond the mountains. Edward stood immediately. Hope and terror collided inside him at once. Because if he could feel her, then she wasn't alone anymore. And somewhere deep inside his instincts, another realization surfaced slowly. Male wolf. Dangerous. Not Moonfang. Edward's blood ran cold instantly. Because there was only one alpha powerful enough to survive that far north during winter. Only one man was reckless enough to shelter the missing Luna of Moonfang. Alpha Adrian. Edward's oldest enemy. And suddenly, the fear inside him became something much worse. Weeks passed beneath endless snow. And slowly, Sophia stopped looking like someone waiting to die. Frostfang territory remained brutal even after the storms weakened. Ice covered the cliffs surrounding Adrian's mountain estate. Wolves patrolled the forests below in complete silence. The cold here never truly disappeared. But inside the stone fortress hidden deep within the mountains, Sophia finally experienced something unfamiliar. Peace. Not perfect peace. Not happiness. Just the absence of constant emotional pain. And after years beside Edward, that alone felt unreal. First she barely trusted it. Every morning she expected coldness, distance, obligation disguised as kindness. Instead, Adrian simply treated her carefully. Not delicately, not pityingly, carefully. There was a difference. He brought meals to her personally whenever winter sickness weakened her. Kept fires burning late into the night when the temperature dropped dangerously. Walked beside her slowly during short walks through the snowy courtyards once her strength returned. Quiet acts. Gentle acts. The kind Sophia no longer knew how to process. Because people who spend years emotionally neglected often become suspicious of kindness. They wait for conditions attached to it. But Adrian never demanded anything from her. Never asked her to smile. Never pressured her to explain her pain. Never tried to touch the parts of her still bleeding emotionally. He simply noticed when she was cold. I noticed when she was tired. I noticed her. And somehow, that broke her far more than cruelty ever had. One evening, heavy snow drifted softly across Frostfang cliffs, while Sophia stood alone outside the estate overlooking the frozen valley below. The mountains looked endless at night. Beautiful. Lonely. Dangerous. Sophia wrapped her cloak tighter around herself as wind moved through the courtyard. Then quietly, she cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just silent tears slipping down her face while she stared into darkness. Footsteps approached behind her. Adrian. He stopped beside her without speaking immediately. For several moments they simply stood there listening to the wind. Then finally, "He hurt you deeply." Sophia laughed softly. A bitter sound. "I kept begging someone to love me." The honesty in her voice carried years of exhaustion. Adrian studied her carefully after that. And suddenly, something dangerous moved behind his silver eyes. Not desire. Anger. Controlled anger. Then he was a fool. Sophia looked away quickly, because hearing someone say that out loud almost hurts worse. For years, she convinced herself Edward's emotional distance was her fault somehow. Maybe she wasn't strong enough. Maybe she wasn't beautiful enough. Maybe another woman truly would make a better Luna. But here in Frostfang, far away from Moonfang politics and palace whispers, those beliefs slowly began cracking apart. And the terrifying part? Adrian saw it happening. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles south beyond the mountains, Alpha Edward was losing what remained of his sanity. The search finally produced results 12 days later. One surviving tracker returned near death after crossing northern territory. Frostfang wolves. Hidden mountain routes. An isolated estate buried beneath cliffs. Edward understood immediately. Adrian. The realization hit like poison. His wolf erupted violently beneath his skin. Not him. Anyone but him. Because Edward knew Adrian's reputation better than anyone alive. Strategic. Patient. Protective toward anything under his care. And now Sophia was under his protection. The thought nearly drove Edward feral. Not because he believed Adrian would hurt her. Worse. Because Adrian might treat her better than he ever had. For days Edward tried planning logically. Wait for the storm to weaken. Bring warriors. Prepare negotiations. But none of it mattered anymore. The mate bond was pulling him apart. Every night he felt flashes of Sophia's emotions faintly through the connection. Fear is fading slowly. Exhaustion easing. Safety. Safety. And somehow, that made him even more desperate. Because Sophia felt safer with another alpha than she ever felt beside her own husband. On the 16th night, Edward finally snapped. Without escort. Without council approval. Without waiting for sunrise. He crossed into Frostfang territory alone. The blizzard nearly killed him twice. Snow buried entire mountain paths beneath ice. Winds tore through forests hard enough to split frozen branches. Even Edward's wolf struggled against the brutal cold surrounding the northern cliffs. Still, he kept moving. Because somewhere ahead, Sophia was breathing. And he needed to see her before his own mind destroyed itself completely. 3 days later, Edward finally reached Frostfang estate at dusk. Massive stone walls rose from the mountainside like part of the cliffs themselves. Black wolves patrolled silently near the outer gates. Smoke curled upward from towering chimneys into dark winter skies. The estate looked less like a home, and more like a fortress built to survive the end of the world. Edward barely noticed any of it, because the moment he entered the courtyard, he saw her. Sophia stood near the eastern balcony wrapped in dark fur beside Adrian. Safe. Warm. Alive. For one suspended moment, Edward couldn't breathe. Her cheeks carried color again. The exhaustion beneath her eyes had softened. Snowflakes drifted through strands of dark hair while firelight from nearby windows illuminated her face gently. And then, Sophia smiled at something Adrian said. Softly. Naturally. The exact smile she used to reserve only for Edward. Jealousy ripped through him so violently he nearly shifted on the spot. His wolf reacted instantly. Mine. Not his. Mine. The possessiveness felt savage now. Humiliatingly desperate. Because Edward suddenly realized something unbearable. Sophia looked happier here. With Adrian. The enemy he spent years hating. Adrian noticed him first. Of course he did. The Frostfang Alpha turned slowly toward the courtyard entrance. Silver eyes calm. Unreadable. Then his lips curved slightly. You finally came. The words weren't mocking. That somehow made them worse. Sophia froze instantly. Slowly, she turned around. And the moment her eyes met Edward's, everything inside him shattered completely. Because she looked at him like a stranger. No warmth. No relief. No desperate love lighting up her face. Nothing. Just distant calmness. As though the man standing in front of her was no longer the center of her world. Edward felt physically sick. For years he assumed Sophia would always love him no matter how cold he became. That certainty had followed him like breathing. Now, standing inside another alpha's territory, while snow fell silently around them, he realized he had destroyed that love himself. And the most terrifying part? Sophia no longer looked like she wanted it back. Edward's knees hit the snow hard. The sound disappeared beneath the storm instantly. For one impossible moment, nobody moved. Not Sophia. Not Adrian. Not even the wolves guarding the Frostfang estate beyond the cliffs. Because Alpha Edward, the man feared across northern territories, the ruler who never bowed to enemies, the wolf who survived wars without breaking, was kneeling in the snow, begging, "Sophia, please." His voice cracked openly now. The storm tore through the mountains around them violently. Snow whipped across black stone. The frozen sky above Frostfang looked endless and merciless. And still, Edward remained on his knees before her, not caring how humiliating it looked. Because humiliation meant nothing compared to losing her forever. Sophia stared at him silently. The sight felt unreal. For years she imagined Edward finally fighting for her, finally chasing her, finally loving her loudly enough for the whole world to hear. But now that it was happening, her heart only hurt. Because grief changes people. And some wounds heal into distance instead of forgiveness. "I love you." The words echoed softly between them. Too late. That was the tragedy of it. Not that Edward was lying. Sophia could see now that he meant every word. The problem was, love arriving after destruction still leaves destruction behind. Sophia closed her eyes briefly. Memories attacked her instantly. Waiting outside windows during storms for Edward to return safely. Eating dinners alone while he attended meetings with Victoria. Crying silently into pillows so servants wouldn't hear. Years loving him until there was almost nothing left of herself. And now he loves her. Now he understood. Now he looked shattered enough to finally see her pain. A broken laugh escaped Sophia softly. Not cruel. Heartbroken. "You finally say it after I nearly died." Edward lowered his head painfully. Because there was no defense against that truth. Behind Sophia, Adrian remained silent near the estate entrance. Watching carefully. His expression is unreadable. But beneath that calm exterior, his wolf was alert. Because one wrong movement from Edward, one sign of emotional instability, and Adrian would intervene instantly. Not because he wanted Sophia for himself. Because he understood something Edward learned too late. Broken women should not be cornered emotionally. Especially not while carrying children. The wind intensified violently around them. Sophia wrapped her cloak tighter instinctively. Edward noticed immediately. That tiny movement nearly destroyed him further. Because once upon a time, she used to reach for him when she was cold. Now she protected herself automatically. Without him. "You should rest," Adrian said quietly behind her. Edward's jaw tightened instantly. The familiarity in Adrian's voice ignited something ugly inside him again. But then Sophia answered softly, "I'm all right." And Edward froze. Because her voice around Adrian sounded calm. Safe. Not anxious. Not careful. Safe. The realization hollowed him out completely. Adrian stepped closer then. Not threatening. Measured. "You cross Frostfang borders alone during a death storm," he said calmly. "You're exhausted." Edward slowly stood again. Every instinct inside him screamed at the sight of another alpha standing near Sophia protectively. Mine. The possessiveness felt unbearable now. But another realization hit even harder. Adrian protected Sophia better in a few weeks than Edward had protected her emotionally in 7 years. The shame nearly suffocated him. Sophia looked between both men silently. Two powerful alphas. Two completely different kinds of danger. Edward burned like chaos now. Raw emotion. Desperation. Regret. Adrian was colder. Steady. Controlled. Safe enough for wounded people to breathe around. And somewhere deep inside herself, Sophia realized why Edward's sudden love terrified her. Because she no longer trusted it to last. "What happens when we go back?" she asked quietly. Edward looked at her immediately. "We rebuild." Sophia's eyes filled slowly. You ignored me for years. Pain crossed his face instantly. I know. You let another woman humiliate me publicly. I know. You planned to replace me while I was carrying your children. Edward physically flinched. Each sentence sounded like punishment. But Sophia wasn't yelling. That somehow hurt more. Because calm pain usually means someone already cried too long before reaching this point. Snow drifted heavily between them again. Then finally, Sophia whispered the question that truly mattered. What happens when you stop feeling guilty? Edward stared at her, unable to answer immediately, because guilt wasn't the only thing destroying him. Love was there too now. Real love. Terrifying love. The kind that arrived too late and suddenly demanded everything at once. But Sophia had lived too long without warmth to trust sudden fire. And both of them knew it. Silence stretched painfully across the courtyard. Then unexpectedly, Adrian spoke. If you want her forgiveness, he said quietly, you'll have to survive becoming the man she needed before she disappeared. Edward looked at him sharply. Adrian's silver eyes remained calm. No grand speeches, he continued. No alpha pride. Not claiming her because she carries your heirs. His gaze shifted briefly toward Sophia. Just consistency. The word landed heavily, because consistency was exactly what Sophia never received. Edward swallowed hard. Then slowly, he looked at Sophia again. Really looked at her. Not as his Luna. Not as the mother of his heirs. Not as something belonging to him. As a woman emotionally exhausted from loving him. And suddenly, he understood something horrifying. Sophia wasn't deciding whether she still loved him. She was deciding whether loving him again would destroy her twice. The realization nearly broke him all over again. Far below the cliffs, wolves howled somewhere through the storm. The sound echoed across Frostfang Mountains like mourning. Sophia pressed a trembling hand against her stomach again. The twins shifted faintly beneath her heartbeat. Tiny lives. Completely innocent. And suddenly, everything became larger than heartbreak. Because whatever happened next would shape the world those children entered. A world built on resentment? Or healing? Edward took one careful step closer. Then stopped himself. Giving her space. For the first time in years, he chose what Sophia needed instead of what he wanted. That tiny decision did not go unnoticed. Sophia saw it immediately. And somehow, that hurt too. Because if he had learned this years ago, none of this would have happened. Tears slid silently down Edward's face again. I don't expect forgiveness tonight, he whispered. His voice broke. I just need you alive. Sophia looked at him for a very long time after that. The man she once loved more than herself stood in front of her completely undone. Not powerful. Not untouchable. Humans. And maybe that was the cruelest ending of all. Not that Edward never loved her. But he learned how to love only after losing her. The storm continued swallowing the mountains around them, while the future remained uncertain beneath frozen skies. No promises. No easy reconciliation. Just broken hearts standing in the snow between regret and love, and the terrifying possibility that some people meet their soulmate too early to know how to keep them.